You're listening to Edge of Faith, a multimedia magazine where we discuss art and culture through a Christian lens. So Don, thanks for taking the time to talk with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, Michael. Good to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good talking with you. So, as we discussed earlier, this issue of Edge of Faith is on spirituality and mysticism, or, really how to become closer with God. Your books, The Reluctant Witness and The Spiritually Vibrant Home, are great guides for that exact vision of being closer with God. So perhaps you could start with telling us about The Reluctant Witness to begin with, because I think that, talking about God to others is a great path to be closer to God.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was wonderful to work on this project, follow this line of curiosity. What is it like for people today to talk about faith? And a subset of that is, what is it like for Christians to talk about their faith? And as we did the research of that, it was fascinating and to find out how people do grow closer to God, how their own experience of faith is delightful, grows in ways when they talk, even when they're talking with non-Christians, people who don't share their faith, about Jesus. In fact, the research showed us that the three top emotions that Christians experience when sharing about their faith is peace and joy and laughter. And that's really surprising. You would think, nervousness, terror or something like that. But you really, we even see that when Paul's writing in Romans and he's talking about the importance of sharing Jesus with others, right? He says, how can people hear about him if there isn't someone talking about him? And then he goes on to quote Isaiah, who said, "How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news." And it's this fascinating turn from like the utility of talking about Jesus, like people can't be saved if we don't talk about Jesus, they can't hear about him and can't have faith in him. And it's this turn that Paul makes and that we see in the prophet Isaiah as well, who's saying it's not that the literal feet of people who are talking about salvation, it's not that our literal feet are beautiful, but there's something about our readiness, that there's there's something delightful, something beautiful, something aesthetically and experientially wonderful about talking about our faith. And so we see that indicated in Scripture, and the latest research really does bear that out, that there's something special that happens when we are talking with someone else about our faith, whether they share our faith or not.
Do you think some of that is that as we share our faith, we actually learn more about our faith in God as we release it? Maybe that's an interesting.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a part of it. I think there are a lot of reasons probably why we grow and we mature when we talk about our faith. But I would say from my own experience, I really think about something. I really get something when I have to teach someone else. I experience that as a preacher and as a teacher. It's kind of after the sermon, I go, oh, now I get the passage. And so there is something about having to verbalize and slow down our thoughts enough to say, what do I think about this? And to find the right words to lay over the thing that we're talking about, that I think does help us clarify things. It helps us remember things better. It helps us ponder them more deeply. Because we can think all sorts of things at the same time, but when you're talking, you can kind of only say one word at a time. It sort of forces you into a deeper kind of reflection about what you're talking about. So, I agree with you. I think that's a part of why we grow by talking about our faith, is because it forces us to engage with it on a deeper, more personal level maybe than we have.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's And it's, kind of our commission. We're supposed to do it. So there you go.
That's right. That's good. It's good for us.
Exactly. So, both of these books are produced with a partnership with the Lutheran Hour Ministries,
Mm-hmm.
and also with Barna, both pretty big organizations. But for
Mm-hmm.
some of those that may not know about these groups, or maybe not know the details of what they do, could you just briefly talk about them?
Yeah, so Lutheran Hour Ministries has a really weird name. It's kind of named after a radio show, but it's like a 103-year-old global ministry that's all about bringing Christ to the nations. And it was seeded out of the Lutheran stream of the faith, and they're active all across the world for 100 years. They have been using media to get the message about Jesus out there and to equip lay people to share Jesus with others. And so they were radio before radio was cool, right? I mean, they were always like, what's the cutting edge? How do we use the new media on the horizon, that's just on the horizon, for the sake of the gospel? So that's Lutheran Hour Ministries. And then the Barna Group is a Christian research organization, so really, really smart people who they're really committed, because culture is changing so fast around us. Really, their call as an organization is to help churches and Christian leaders through social sciences and through research gain clarity about the world we're actually living in today, so that we can more faithfully navigate that. And so those two organizations, they came together to basically say, let's study every year, let's study a new topic together that is relevant to just average, everyday Christians, having to help them figure out, how do I live faithfully? How do I follow Jesus today? Not in the world that existed 100 years ago or 50 years ago or 2,000 years ago, but the world that I'm walking on today. And so that's this research partnership. So first year of the partnership, they were talking about spiritual conversations. That was the research topic. And the second year, they were researching households. How is the faith nurtured, passed on within our households?
Yeah. And I have to say I love Barna, but that I'm kind of a geek. I mean, they have so much data and so awesome infographics. I mean, it's a great
Yeah,
organization.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
but back to the books. The Reluctant Witness. We'll finish up on that one. There's
Hmm.
a lot of data showing how spiritual conversations have dropped over the years, which is sad and
Hmm.
informative. Could you speak to that and how we as Christians can overcome some of those obstacles that prevent us from having those conversations? I know as I read the book, you originally weren't real keen on those conversations, so I know you've got experiential knowledge. So
That's right. I am the reluctant witness. That's why I called the book that. Yeah, yeah. So the reality, what the findings show us is that, in a phrase, the cat's got our tongue. Christians in the United States are talking about their faith less. And we have another research project we did together 25 years ago. I wasn't around then, but that they did together. So we have some, we can look at the change over time. We're talking about our faith less with each other, and we're talking about our faith less with non-Christians who don't share the faith. And it's pretty sobering. A wide variety. So about 3/4 of all Christians in the United States have had 9 or fewer spiritual conversations in the last 12 months. And that's not evangelistic conversations. That's any conversation with anyone about your faith or your lack of faith. And so that's talking with a friend about, what'd you think of the sermon today? That's being in a small group and talking about your faith. 3/4 of all Christians in the U.S. have had 9 or fewer of those. That's like 1 every month and a half.
that's sad.
Yeah, it is. And there's lots of reasons for it. I mean, we learned a lot. It's sobering, and we did learn, some of it is inattentiveness. People are going to church less. Some of it is fear of offense, kind of the change in the culture around us, that a lot of Christians have a perception that if they talk about their faith, that they will be seen as offensive. So there's various reasons for it. So it's very sobering, Michael, but there's really encouraging stuff in the findings too. And so, like, one encouraging thing is that we have less to be afraid of than we think, right? So there's this perception among Christians, like, oh man, if I talk about my faith at all, I'm going to have my head bitten off. Actually, non-Christians really enjoy spiritual conversations. Non-Christians, the top two emotions they experience when they reflect on their last spiritual conversation they had were peace and joy. When you ask non-Christians, are you glad about the most recent spiritual conversation you had? The majority of them, not all, but the majority of them say, yeah, I am. So part of how we can find our tongue or find our voice again is by realizing I don't have as much to be afraid of. And then part of it is learning from the folks who are still talking about their faith a lot. So we call, in the research, we call the quarter of all Christians who are having lots of spiritual conversations, we call them eager conversationalists. And they have different traits in common with each other, 5 different traits that through the data came to the top that they all share with each other. And so that's something that we can actually learn from and kind of take some cues from those who are talking about their faith a lot and, frankly, having a really good time doing it. So one example would be eager conversationalists. They graciously adapt to whomever they're talking to. And so they pay attention to the spiritual posture of the person they're talking to, and then they try to meet them where they are, rather than having, some sort of pre-memorized, statement about the faith that they kind of, regurgitate and burp out into the conversation awkwardly. Rather than doing that, they kind of get a sense, where's the person I'm talking to, and they meet them where they are. That's a really simple habit. That's just one example of the 5, but that's a really simple habit that all of us can learn from.
Absolutely. I can't help but think about some of the other conversations I have with people about witnessing. I'm Anglican, so I talk to a lot of the bishops and others in Africa and other places where there's some serious repercussions with witnessing, like death. And
that's right.
And
that's right.
Yet they tell me, like, a couple of years back I was talking to one, and our church had 1 baptism that year. They had 300 that month, and I'm like, what is the deal with the more that's on the line, the more people actually converse about it? It's like they thrive on the joy of Jesus, But as you get more comfortable, you're like, well, someone might think I'm stupid. I'm like, well, maybe they will.
Yeah, that's right. And to the good news is just trying it. Both the scripture and the research findings tell us, in general, you're going to enjoy it. You'll actually enjoy it, and so that builds momentum, and you'll find yourself talking about your faith more. So, in short, how do we find our voice again? One conversation at a time, and learning as we go along.
Absolutely. So the Spiritually Vibrant Home. This book all started with one of the research projects of Barna's and the Lutheran Hour, of course. But as you mentioned in the book, you were really curious about the subject, so you decided to have a class about it. And you sounded a little distraught at the beginning of the book, but perhaps you could share about the class and what you learned?
Yeah, it was great. As the initial findings were coming in, I just wanted to have a community of other learners around me to kind of be processing and thinking about not just I like nerding out about the data like you, Michael, but to actually be asking, okay, what does this mean in real life? And so I started a class in my church. I just called it Households of Faith. So there were about 40 of us meeting every Sunday for about 9 months. And we just, we kind of took the Bible in our left hand and the Barna research in our right hand and said, what do these two things help us? How do they help us look in the mirror to learn about our own household and what God's will is for our households and how our households are actually doing, how spiritually vibrant they are? And it was great, Michael. It was surprisingly vulnerable and emotional because, there's something about your household and thinking about the people you live with and your extended household, the people who are in and out of your home, that, it gets really non-theoretical really fast. and, issues from people's family of origin. We had dads who were in tears because they said, I don't know how to pray with my own kids because I don't remember my dad praying with me. So healing stuff was coming up. People being kind of almost embarrassed about, we don't study the Bible in my household, and I wouldn't even know how to. I had one dad who said, the only thing I know in the Bible is what's in my kids' Bible board book. And it's like, okay, how do you start there? So the class was a place for us to get really honest about what the findings were revealing about what makes for a spiritually vibrant household, and then evaluating our own household based on that, and looking at what Scripture had to say. And so it was a place to get honest, and we did homework, pun intended, where we would say, okay, what am I going to try in my home this week? What am I going to try different? And that was scary too, right? Because we get, I have teenagers in my house, so you're kind of, you already have some roots, you already have some rhythms, and so to change those can be scary. To do that. And so it was wonderful, and it helped make my handling of the research be much more than intellectual or academic or theological, but to be, really existential and practical as well.
Absolutely. And, as you mentioned, the book's, packed with wonderful information about building a spiritually dynamic home life. And so I kind of wanted to build two questions off of this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about a few of the ideas in your book about how to build this home life? And what's really, I guess, important in our times today is address some of your thoughts on how this could be focused with the current pandemic, and how families are sharing a lot of time together now with all these lockdowns. So
that's right.
It's a perfect opportunity.
That's right. Yeah. So the first part of the question, what are some of the things they learned? Some of it was sobering, right? Dads are outperformed by far by moms in terms of having a spiritual effect on the people in their families, and a wide variety of reasons for that. But as a dad, that was sobering to look at and kind of reckon with. But really encouraging stuff. So the good news is the things that they found correspond to spiritual vibrancy are things that actually any household can do, right? So these were things that were common among different household types, multi-generational households, single-parent households, roommates living together, nuclear households. And so that's really encouraging, right? We had even grandparents in the class who were learning and finding out. For example, one of the findings, the people that, when they're in the household, people look to more often for some kind of spiritual guidance are grandparents. People want to learn from grandparents about those things. Man, we had a table of grandmas who were thrilled with those findings. So there were three habits that really rose to the top that really correspond to spiritual vibrancy in the home, and I call them messy prayers, loud tables, and open doors. So I'll give you an example. Messy prayers. So one of the findings was that households that in some way are regularly interacting with God together through prayer or through His Word, there's more spiritual vibrancy. And maybe that doesn't, maybe that's not shocking to find out. But what's encouraging about that is that it doesn't have to be like high quality. In other words, it doesn't make a difference if you can like lead a perfect family devotion or something like that. Spiritually vibrant homes, they have coaching going on, spiritual coaching, but all it takes is someone taking the initiative. And so, for example, we had dads in our class who were like, okay, so it would help my home if we prayed more together, but I'm uncomfortable praying out loud. What do I do about that? Well, the findings said all you have to do is initiate it. It's about nudging things. And so we had dads who they would go home and say, okay, before we leave on vacation, I think one of us should pray. Just that, and then they wouldn't do the praying. They would just initiate and say, I think someone should pray. Why don't you pray? And even that act, as kind of small and simple as that is, actually corresponds with greater spiritual vibrancy. The same is true for being in the Bible. So just initiating a simple thing, a daily devotion, liturgies. In my household, I really like, I kind of nerd out about words, and I found this book called Every Moment Holy. It's a great book by Douglas McKelvey, and it's like liturgy for your morning coffee, liturgy for changing a diaper, liturgy for those who weep and don't know why, liturgy for when you hear birdsong, all this everyday liturgies. And so I just started saying in my household, something would come up, we'd have people over, and I'd say, oh, we're going to do a liturgy together before we have dinner. And my teenagers all groaned and were like, oh, Dad, are you serious? and so for me, it was like, it actually doesn't matter if it's awkward. It actually doesn't matter if they groan. It matters that I'm initiating something. And my kids tease me now because some event will come up and they'll say, hey, Dad, is there a liturgy for that? They kind of tease me about it, but the reality is we're praying more together because of that. So that's one of the findings. Another one is loud tables, that households that talk with each other about their faith and about their emotions and about their lives have greater spiritual vibrancy. And so, you don't have to be a spiritual counselor, but just talking and having an atmosphere that is open to conversation. And one of the findings was that if a whole household is together, the odds are they're eating a meal. And so, okay, how can just with a little nudge, how can you spark a conversation around the table, get people off their screens maybe, and just get a conversation going? We kind of based on those findings, inspired by that, at Lutheran Hour, we made a deck of playing cards. It's a regular deck. You can play games with it, but each card has a different conversation starter on it. Little things like that to help spark spiritual conversations. Those kind of things. It doesn't have to be high quality, but it's just someone nurturing it on a somewhat regular basis. Someone nudging those things helps create more spiritual vibrancy.
That's awesome. So, yeah, I guess that would be easy enough to apply a lot of those things to what we're experiencing today as well. I mean, obviously, a lot of the in and out of the household is more of a where you have a virtual dinner or something like that with friends, which is a new experience I'm learning to deal with. But
yeah, it's a unique environment right now because part of the findings are that we're really busy people, and so we're not necessarily having unhurried time with the people in our household very much, and that has changed. And and so I've been asked a lot about this actually with the pandemic, because a lot of people are saying, what do you do when you're stuck in your household with these people? And one of the things that I've said, and I'm trying to lean into this in my own household, as a good friend has told me, never waste pain. So if don't waste a good crisis. I mean, if we're going to have this disruption, to use this disruption, things are already disrupted, right? Our usual rhythms, our usual ruts maybe that we're in, our usual apathies are totally disrupted right now. And so anyone who's listening to this who's thinking, I wish my household was a little more spiritually vibrant, this is really a perfect opportunity for two reasons. One, you're there together a lot. And number two, your normal rhythm is already disrupted. And so it can feel a little more normal to say, let's try something new. I know we've never done this before, but I was thinking before bed every night we could all pray. We'll meet in the living room and kind of share prayers with each other. Or let's FaceTime with Grandma and Grandpa and ask them questions. Any question you want to ask Grandma and Grandpa, or any of that kind of stuff. Sometimes it can be hard to introduce new rhythms or habits into a household. Well, no one's in their regular habits right now, so it's kind of a ripe time to try something new.
Absolutely. And, news always good. Don, thank you for taking the time to discuss these things with us and for writing the books. And just really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. I enjoy the opportunity to talk about how to lean into mysticism, how to lean into infusing our everyday with our experience of God. So I appreciate getting to think alongside you.